Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it another few minutes, a few seconds, maybe another minute before we start the webinar. We let people finish up the poll. Looks like we got a wide range of people on the call. It's great.
I think we can go ahead and start now.
Okay, well, let's get going.
Matt.
Yep. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you for joining us for the series of national conversations on creative youth development. I'm Matt Dorigo with the Claire Rose Foundation, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by an incredible group of speakers who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. Excuse me. The CYD Toolkit Series is designed to amplify key themes in a set of written briefs by field experts. Each webinar engages a diverse community of stakeholders, young people, experts, funders, and practitioners to explore new paths forward for the field of creative youth development. During today's webinar, our Meredith Eppel Jylkka's paper, Funding, Sustainability, and Partnerships, will discuss key insights and recommendations, put them into context for today's new reality, as well as hear unique perspectives from Tarek Ward and Keita Swabak. The virtual learning series is brought to you by Creative Youth Development National Partnership. It is hosted by the National Guild for Community Arts Education and made possible by the generous support of the Claire Rose Foundation. The written briefs on which each webinar is based are part of the first phase of a CYD Toolkit for the field, a multi-year CYD National Partnership project led by Americans for the Arts. Today's webinar is scheduled to last 60 minutes. Your audio and video have been disabled for this webinar. However, if you'd like to ask a question or share an idea, we encourage you to do so. Simply type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring these questions throughout the presentation, and we refer to them for the discussion during the last 30 minutes of the webinar. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. Again, my name is Matt Dorigo. I'm the Director of Creative Youth Development for the Claire Rose Foundation. And why don't we go around to Meredith? I'll just call on people.
Hello, Meredith Eppel Jylkka. I bring experience as a youth arts nonprofit leader, a grant maker with a youth arts focus, and a fundraiser. I also have a research background with a focus on community-based arts organizations and sustainability of arts partnerships. Great to be here.
Great. Keita.
Hi, I'm Keita Swabak, and I'm Program Officer for Creative Youth Development at the Massachusetts Cultural Council.
Great. Tarek, you there?
I am. I'm Tarek Ward. I'm the Director of Music Programs for Elma Philanthropies, and we work with youth development agencies around the country that have incorporated music into their work.
Great. Thank you all for offering your time and expertise for today, and let's get right into it. Meredith, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you. First, I just want to begin by thanking the Guild for having me here today, thanking Americans for the Arts for inviting me to contribute as an author to the Landscape Toolkit, and also, of course, the NEA and the Mass Cultural Council, my local arts agency, and each of these organizations for their leadership in supporting CYD as a field. I thought we could begin from a place of love and just acknowledge that as we enter the weekend, we really need a group hug. This has been a very difficult, challenging environment for the last couple months. And now more than ever, we need to be together and think in a collective way. As you may know, philanthropy means love for mankind. That's how it translates. And together we are united in our collective vision and commitment to support young people to become their best selves. So like the work that we're doing in the field, sustainability is really based on relationships. So that is sort of the background, big picture that I believe all funding, sustainability, and partnership work lands on. So throughout the slides, I talk a little bit about the stages of love, and it may sound a little corny, but I think it does provide sort of a backdrop on how we think about relationships and how they progress. So from that kind of initial attraction based on the shared interests and commonalities that we may have, to building trust, to listening, communicating, and developing empathy, and then to ultimately building a commitment and loyalty for a vision of a joint future. So I think we can think in terms of organizations and funders and donors within this realm. Of course, there are balance of power issues that in all relationships we need to think about. So we know that that's the case in sort of the funder dynamic. So a little bit about the paper. So I was charged with writing, looking at adjacent sectors that might, shed some light on best practices or learnings for CYD. And so I selected out of school time as an area, largely because it's a very robust field. It's very well developed. It shares some commonalities with CYD, such as, a high demand for programs, challenges accessing financial resources to meet those demands, and also, a way of accessing funds that can come from a variety of sectors and areas that can be also applied to CYD. And, some of the factors in out of school time that make it so robust are sort of this ecosystem approach that has developed around having a national intermediary organization, statewide networks, a research agenda that sort of pushes for quality improvements and uplifts exemplary models. There's federal initiatives that have funding dollars attached to them. Some of those initiatives bring in private donors to complement that. And then, of course, there are many national foundations that are highly visible supporting the work of out of school time. So, with all of that, there's a lot that CYD can glean from. And with all of that, I think OS out of school time has been able to impact policies. So, I think ultimately that sort of policy impact and supporting the health of the field is where we want to get to. So I think we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to have a poll or two just to understand where folks are, what folks are experiencing. So, obviously we're facing unprecedented challenges at this moment. It's not often you see an explosion and a heart in the same slide. So, our youth are under increasing pressures, stresses, and now isolations. So our programs and organizations are trying to adapt their way of operating and survive. And already we've been trying to keep up with demand. So that has already been a challenge for CYD and for youth programs generally, which cite financial stability as their greatest threat, according to the Nonprofit Finance Fund in one of their recent surveys. So these are really emergency conditions that we're operating under, and I had a very different presentation a month ago. So like everyone, we've had to be flexible. So in considering like this relationship lens, I think it's a critical time for us to reflect on our situation, to sort of reframe potentially our messaging and how we talk about our work. and articulate and communicate our needs to stakeholders, to consider a reimagining of our programs and operations, and the potential for partnership, and where are the allies that will help sustain our work. And, you know, all of this serves to sort of reinforce our collective identity. So I sort of came up with this framework of, you know, 4 or 5 R's that I thought were instructive in this conversation. And I wanted to sort of look at some best practices. So the slides refer to, you know, are we thinking about, can we collect the data that we need to articulate the value of our programs? Are we telling our story in compelling ways? Because we know that story is of utmost importance in allowing our donors and our partners to want to be part of the work that we're doing. Are we budgeting for the full costs? Are we including administrative expenses along with our programmatic expenses? Do we have, you know, have we cast aside the break-even budgets and all that? Again, the Nonprofit Finance Fund has sort of schooled us in, if you know, you're reading this work, but really looking at sort of best practices around budgeting, you know, so that potentially we enter this crisis with cash reserves or other, you know, supports that will get us through this immediate challenging stage that we're faced with. And then have we created a culture of philanthropy, you know, in which we're really engaging our stakeholders with our mission, to allow them to really play a role in resource development so that they too have a voice that they can give to the work that we do and make a case for giving. And, you know, can we think about balancing our revenue streams? Is that something that we can look at? I know that, you know, CYD programs generally are likely to be higher reliance on grants and not as much so on earned income. Are there, you know, are there ways to think about setting the stage? I know it's a difficult time to, you know, start an individual giving plan, but there are ways to engage folks to set the stage for that. All right, well, it's good to see here that a lot of people have received some COVID relief. I mean, 35%. So, you know, of all of these, that's the largest among the poll bunch. So we're going to go to the next slide. And again, if there are funders on the call, we have a poll to get a sense of what they have been doing to adapt to this environment as well. So again, broadly with this relationship lens, you know, funders can listen, trust that those in the field know what they need, react with empathy, communicate with transparency. They can similarly take this time to reflect on their practices and potentially reframe their giving strategies. They can support grantees in a reimagining process and take part in reinforcing our collective identity. So, you know, to the extent that funders are able to look in sort of this short-term immediate needs, interim needs, and long-term needs, I think for the field that is critically important, because I think, you know, we know there's a lot of infused money right now into relief efforts, and then, you know, we wonder beyond that how the funding will sustain. So, you know, foundations at this point can consider increasing their payouts from 5 to 10%. So can donor advised funds. I mean, there's $121 billion sitting in donor advised funds. So, you know, these are large pools of money. Granted, they're difficult to access and mostly accessed through major gifts and individual donors. But you know, it's worth the research to try and do some due diligence on how to look at those. Easing grant restrictions, of course, you know, I think probably most all programs hopefully have seen that from their donors. and funders in particular, foundations. Foundations can take a trust-based approach, shifting funds from project to operating, accelerating payments, easing deadlines and reporting requirements. These are all practices that I think that we have felt could benefit the field broadly anyway, and certainly the shift from project to operating support and the ability to receive multi-year funding is always something that both organizations are advocating for, obviously, for obvious reasons. We know that equity is a persistent challenge. I don't know if you saw the recent report from Echoing Green and Bridgespan, but that did show that organizations led by people of color are reaping less grant money than those with white leaders. So, this really is an ongoing issue on, different levels. So to the extent to which funders can bring diverse voices to the decision-making table, including youth, considering participatory grant-making experiences, sort of empowering the grant beneficiaries to determine how best to support their communities, to consider diversification of boards of trustees and even hire chief equity officers. So those are some, practices that could move the needle in that direction. Capacity building of grantees can focus on helping them reframe and reimagine again their work, and consider mutually beneficial partnerships. Funders should also consider developing philanthropic partnerships to support the work of CYD. So those funders who have been involved with collaboratives like this know that the impacts are amplified, that organizational visibility is increased, as is sort of the collective identity of the field. So these are all factors that can ensure long-term sustainability. And I guess we can go to the next slide. And then really, I just wanted to end throwing out a couple questions that could be taken up for discussion based on some of the successes in the out-of-school time realm. I'll just read the first one, just about partnerships. How can we establish partnerships to build and support the field and influence policy? And, at this time now, can we imagine new and unusual allies? So that is my presentation. And, I look forward to hearing from others and taking part in the discussion. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Meredith. Tarek, I know you've got you next on your response and your insights on the national level and perspective on what's happening with CYD funding right now.
Awesome. I'm starting my stopwatch now. Okay. So I'm going to piggyback on a lot of those ideas. And I think the first thing that I want to say is this is still a people business. So first and foremost, connect with your people. If you're a funder, call everybody in your portfolio. And the only thing on the agenda is how are you doing? And how is your team doing? How are your young people doing? It's really hard to stress that enough, because just that outreach can make a world of difference, and you're going to learn a whole lot about what's happening and what's not happening and what needs to happen. So that's like the first thing that sort of undergirds every decision that we've been trying to make throughout this entire ordeal, is just checking in on our people, because if it was hard before, it's hard as hell now. So there's, our job now is to try to make it easier. And part of that might just be listening. So that's kind of the first piece. And then, to kind of ratchet it up, my message is resist the urge to go back to normal. I think there is this pull now to kind of go back and be comfortable. But I think there's value in sitting in this discomfort. And really being able to reflect and look at what's going on, because normal was a thing that we have been fighting this whole time. So to go back would be an enormous missed opportunity. So there was a question just on the screen about, systemic changes. And now is the time, right? You have these systems that have shown their cracks and have shown their limitations. This is the opportunity we have to go in and actually make some substantive and significant changes as to how these systems are actually serving people or not serving people. I think to miss that will be, would be a huge missed opportunity. And I think to that end, when we think about the story that all of these organizations have been telling, the way I like to think about this is that this is just a new chapter in the story that you've been telling this whole time. So it's just not a reinvention in terms of the work that our creative youth development organizations have been doing for some of them for decades. So as you think about that same frame, that people-focused frame, those people are generating that data and those stories, right? So now as you look around your communities and you look at the way things have changed and the way things haven't changed at all over these last 3 or so months, those are the stories that we ought to be collecting and telling, because that's the thing that's going to help us understand how to move forward, right? Because forward is kind of the only direction that matters at this stage. I don't think, again, focusing on how to go back to the way things were is going to be a useful endeavor. And, I think there's value in these kind of communal spaces. I just got off a call and, one of the things stated was that just being able to hear that the problems that you're facing in your local community are not unique. They are not only you, right? These are things that are happening everywhere. Everybody is dealing with this stuff. So the kind of partnerships and ecosystems and communities that we can form to start sharing these ideas and providing just fellowship, I think it's going to be huge, right? Because that's how we're going to be able to kind of put these things together. I mean, these are creative youth development organizations, so that creativity now is key. Right. So now we've got, with creativity also comes collaboration, right? There are very few creatives that do things in isolation, right? So now it's about how do we use these ecosystems and the people around them to start focusing on potential solutions to these problems and honestly solutions that maybe somebody else has come up with. And you can say, oh, that's a good one. Let's see how that worked, right? So I think that is huge. And I think the same goes on the funding side, right? As we start to reimagine how to be productive, partners throughout this whole thing, administrative creativity is a thing, right? So finding ways to navigate your own internal systems for the benefit of your grantees is an enormous help, right? So saying, oh, you know what we can do? Well, we can do this, right? If we do this before this date, and then we make sure that we move this thing over here, then we can get this thing done and it'll be fine for you. And you've only got to fill out one piece of paper, right? You just made their day. And it was all about sort of navigating the internal systems, right? So finding ways to even do the little things like advancing payments, making sure payments go out on time, reimagining measures of success. All the little minutia that were boxes that we used to just check are now levers that we can use, to help organizations that are now trying to find their way through this new world, right? Because I think the other piece that has been very evident is that inconsistency is consistent, right? In terms of the way municipalities and school districts and states and counties have all responded. So everybody's trying to kind of move through these different ecosystems, and they need help, right? And being sort of an actor that can be outside of the system, some of those local systems as we are, can be helpful in being able to offer, perspective. And in that case, for the creatives, for the funders, creativity is key for us, and as well as partnership, right? So if there are areas where we can buttress one another, especially as risk gets recalibrated, right? And this idea of what used to be risky before is now uber risky, and we used to be safe before is now risky, right? Going in together really alleviates some of those pressures, right? So now more than ever, we've got to connect with one another to really start to understand, all right, where are the opportunities for us to pool in and get some of this stuff done where otherwise this would have been a no-brainer. So get on the phone. It doesn't have to be formal. Call your folks and say, okay, hey, are you looking at these folks? What are you thinking? How's this going to work for you? And really just being able to move those pieces on behalf of these organizations that we serve is really just going to be a huge benefit in the long run, particularly as we move out of this phase of crisis survival, and we now move into this place where we're sort of pseudo-sustaining and looking towards transformation, right? What are we going to do in the future? What is this going to look like in the medium and in the long term? That's when we've got to start being thought partners, and that's hard to do from a place of crisis. So once we can get everybody sort of on solid ground, where the ground is not moving under them anymore, then being able to use our collective voice and vision to move stuff forward. I mean, those are the pieces that we've been playing with this whole time, and we're going to try to, figure out what levers we can pull and continue to listen and continue to be thought partners to see if we can help make sure people can move forward through this.
That's great. Thanks, Tarek. I've already got a bunch of questions that I want to ask. So I encourage everybody to use the Q&A box, whether it's a question in response to what you're hearing or just a question you have on your mind. All questions are out there right now, so just type them up and we'll get to them after Keita fills us in on what's happening from her view at the state level in Massachusetts. Take it away, Keita.
Hey, whoops, hold on. I just lost my screen. 1 second. All right, yes. So I just wanted to touch on points that Meredith brought up about articulating value. And I love that notion too of going from Tarek's checkboxes to levers. So this one is about also identity. So I just want to say that my love for creative youth development is bigger than my fear of public speaking, and I'm going to try to help that drive the way. So I just want to say that over the past 25 years, the field of creative youth development has worked particularly hard to form its identity and define its practice. And I think it's thanks to the work of funders combined with the grassroots of practitioners that we've really been able to increase our sector's capacity, sustainability, and impact. So let's talk about networks. You can change the slide next. Thanks. An important pivotal moment happened at CYD when in 2014, the Creative Youth Development Summit took place. And this was with Massachusetts Cultural Council and President's Committee of the Arts and Humanities and National Guild. We convened, energized by the seminal report of the Setting the Agenda by Lauren Stevenson. It set the foundation for the summit's discussion and began to articulate really the DNA of CYD in distinct ways that could help move the field forward. I just think that really coalesced some incredible network building that then transferred into the national partnership, and it's been instrumental in really creating these dialogues between funders, organizations, and young people, as we all help to define what CYD is as a creative practice in the arts, humanities, sciences. So national partnership, I want to highlight CYD values. These are wonderful and ones that I really want us to keep in mind throughout this whole conversation. That of youth voice, racial equity and social justice, and collective action. And how this is done? Well, we have a network here that our Visibility and Impact Network has done a lot of research as well as talked to young people, and it can sort of be summed up into 3 main words. We help young people to create, to connect, and to catalyze. And let's see, and so why are networks important? This has been, I think, absolutely fundamental to our field. And I'll start first of all with the local networks. So Massachusetts Cultural Council has supported the CYD network for over 25 years in youth reach funding, where we offer grants and support in order to help our programs reflect on and strengthen their programs and practice. And our teams reach out directly to organizations, cultural councils, and across the sectors to listen closely to the needs and the problems in order to solve them, to meet those needs. And over the past 10 weeks, especially, we've had our immediate response to the pandemic through emergency grant making, thanks to NEA being able to offer the CARES Act support distinctly for our CYD organizations. And then we've also really been doing some deep listening and holding spaces online for dialogue and support of our colleagues throughout the Commonwealth and also throughout the country. So this has been up to 80 teachers, EDs, young people, and funders have been part of our weekly CYD calls, which has provided a great opportunity for everyone to participate in different breakout rooms. So this is awesome. Folks that probably would have never talked to each other are getting to talk. Secondly, I just want to mention about the peer networks and local networks, how important that has been. Edvestors and Bar Foundation, woohoo, they have helped us to create the Youth Arts Impact Network. And that was created after the Boston Youth Arts evaluation project in order to attend to the needs of many CYD organizations that were trying to assess their impact. We also have then regional and national networks. And this is again mentioning the NEA, yay, thanks to the grant that the National Guild for Community Arts Education was able to get for, I guess now 3 years, to support the implementation of the blueprint for the CYD partnership. And this year it does include 3 regional networks and also the Youth Summit being able to still continue that, which is an incredible place for our young people to connect and have a voice. And then other examples, of course, exist throughout the nation, especially San Diego. Hopefully Matt can talk more about that. Richmond, Detroit, Pittsburgh. So let's see, second slide. So I just want to briefly mention how important it has been too with networks, with Meredith's point of being able to really also figuring out reimagining our data systems and how do we really tell our story in new and inventive ways. With the possibility of collective impact, I really feel like it needs to start with organizations that are able to capture, assess, and analyze their own data really in efficient ways. And this is a chance for funders, researchers, CYD leaders to really help collaborate and create tools and systems that can be used across CYD programs that are more holistic, dynamic, and responsive. So the cool thing is there is a movement underway to build that system. So part of that is going to be led by a national advisory board consisting of 12 creative youth development leaders, advocates, staff, youth, and program alumni from across the country. It will be a CCRM system. And we'll do this through the tracking of demographics, of participants, program surveys that will be able to be tracked in one system. What we feel is that when organizations have this improved access, they will be able to better analyze their data in order to move to more accurately report, improve programming, and ultimately better serve our youth that are participating in these organizations. And also with this efficiency, we're able to transform and really maximize our collective impact and fuel the advocacy and really sustainability of our field, if this type of thing can get funded. Okay, third slide. All right, so this is my most important slide because I really feel like as we start to reimagine, and I so agree, we cannot go back to normal. We have to do something new. And I think the new has to do with our cross-sector partnerships. So I found 3 quotes that, interestingly enough, have to do all with zip codes. So first of all, the arts. Our system rations imagination according to social class and zip code. We need a fundamental disruptions to the system. If you haven't read Danny Palmer-Wolf's article, it's incredible. And this speaks to how the arts opportunity gap is really widest for children in high poverty schools. Then there's the now, which is for many, COVID-19 is a life or death crisis where your zip code determines if you physically and financially survive. It's been shown that communities with a higher percentage of residents that are under 200% of the federal poverty level have over twice as many COVID cases as communities with lower percentages of residents in poverty. And we know this is all about the proximity to the virus. This is embedded discrimination. This is really the weathering of stress and trauma. And then finally we have health. So your zip code reveals more than your genetic code about your health status. What this is about is that health disparities are often linked to social determinants of health. That means social, environmental, and behavioral factors make up a whopping 60% of a person's health. The good news to that is that that's 60% that really can be transformed if we do have the resources to help folks. So it brings us to the final point here, which is the time to center equity in our immediate and long-term response has arrived. This is, Masamir has a recent article in the Nonprofit Quarterly, and it speaks to the need for philanthropy to urgently address the crisis of systemic racism. Racism is the pre-existing condition that creates the disparities, and that this is an ongoing crisis that requires, as she says, urgent, on-the-ground, innovative strategies to reduce harm. Part of these innovative strategies can be seen in the report here, Creating Healthy Communities, Art and Public Health in America. It's an amazing report where they believe, show how the intersection of public health, arts, and culture lie the potential for building stronger and healthy communities in America. And what's really exciting to me about all this is that the priority health issues are really directly aligning with so much that we work with in creative youth development. And these needs are the same things that are so hard to report on or report out to funders. But really, we are dealing with collective trauma, racism, social exclusion, mental health, and chronic disease. A recent WHO report asks, what is the evidence on the role of arts in improving health and well-being? Well, not only is there a wealth of research clearly showing that positive impacts of the arts on both mental and physical health, the arts also have proven to hold promise in tackling difficult and complex problems and have shown economic benefits and greater cost effectiveness to possible health interventions. So lastly, currently with the scarcity of funding for youth arts and institutional funders disappearing, we need to have a relentless focus on how and why art is good for people. Art, at Massachusetts Cultural Council, we've established a new initiative called Culture RX, and that's in order to build a public infrastructure that supports the role of cultural experiences as a protective factor in the health and well-being of all people in the Commonwealth. And this can very much be extended to our work with CYD. So I'll end by saying that a funded network of CYD World would consist of partnerships where equity, underrepresented voices and concerns, and youth voice are at the center when we invest in new systems of culture, health and wellness, and real innovations for change. That's it. Oh, Matt, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I'm muted. Thank you, Keita. You did great. Don't talk about being fear of public speaking. You were great. And I appreciate you really focusing a lot around the health aspect of CYD. That's a lot of conversation we're having here locally in San Diego. How do we reposition creative youth development organizations as community health centers and create that narrative, especially in response to COVID-19. So we'll get to, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on that during the discussion, but there's been a couple of questions some technical questions for you, Keita, around the CRM. I'm wondering how we stay in touch with this National Advisory Group, and do you propose this CRM to replace or supplement existing org systems? How can people learn more about the CRM project? So a lot of stuff around the CRM, if you want to just answer that.
Yeah, so we, I mean, literally this lovely draft has just been drafted in this past month, and we'd love to be able to send whoever is interested a copy of that draft. We are still seeking funding, and our 12-person advisory group will be meeting soon. But yeah, there's a lengthy paper that also is available, as we had been working with North Peak Solutions down in actually San Diego area to really figure out what does a CRM, how could that really look, and how could that best ease the burden of so many organizations. And it's in Salesforce, so a lot of folks that are using Salesforce, it can be integrated.
Great. We'll have to have a whole new webinar on that.
Yeah.
There has been some questions if these slides will be made available. Everybody's really loving the slides. So yes, they will be made available after the webinar, and also this webinar will be archived and be able to be accessed via the internet. So let's see, there's, so just from the funder perspective, what are is everybody's thoughts on how does CYD organizations best reposition themselves? We talked about to be relevant today, because there's so much noise out there
Mhm.
right? Everybody's trying to grab everybody's attention for the funding, whether it's COVID funding or whether it's foundation or individual philanthropists. There's lots of noise. How do we cut through that noise? And what do you feel are the right messages on how organizations, and I think CYD's in the arts and culture community is very uniquely positioned to show how they're serving their communities right now, right? How they're pivoting. So I just want to get, maybe Tarek, maybe.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've been talking and thinking about that a lot. And one of the things that we've seen throughout this is our sort of anchor and legacy community institutions like schools and things like that have all run into problems, right? They've not necessarily sort of been the anchors that they've been historically. So now there's a unique opportunity for CYD organizations to step in and fill some of those gaps that have been left behind and will actually now persist, right? Because if you look around at the myriad of solutions that school districts are presenting, many of them don't include children in school all day, every day, as they were before, right? So now when you think about the very real problem that now poses for parents and for communities for when children are not in school when they otherwise would be, CYD organizations are now in a space to fill some of those gaps from a physical perspective, in terms of just health and safety, but then also now being able to provide services during times of the day where they were otherwise dormant, right? So it's a huge difference in terms of how they can continue to serve and expand the scope of services that they can provide. And then I think also with schools, Keita actually pointed the whole thing out, is that now you've got a whole swath of young people that are now attempting to re-engage with school after 6 months of acute trauma, right? So these are young people who may have been sick themselves, have had family members who have been sick, family members who have died, economic pressures on their homes and their households, all of these things. And now I got to go do math. Well, hold on, right? So you have now these very acute and far more obvious social and emotional needs that art and music organizations are specifically positioned to help alleviate, right? And while the perfect and ideal solution would be, an army of therapists and counselors, well, that didn't exist before, and it certainly doesn't exist now, right? So CYD organizations have a unique opportunity to now position themselves as a truly valuable resource for schools who are going to be strapped, who are now looking for solutions of how do we actually re-engage with young people, make sure they're safe and healthy, and then start thinking about re-engaging academically, right? So I think CYD organizations have an extraordinary opportunity to start filling in those gaps and demonstrating their value by simply doing the things that they were doing before, just at a much larger scale and in different contexts.
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head in that last statement, a much larger scale, right? And so the tension arises where traditionally CYD organizations are really small and focused and they go deep, right? But this ties into what Keita was saying, the necessity of networks, right? Of collective action, of organizations working together to address the issue, because not one organization, the issue is gonna be so big, right? If you got like 75% of young people out of school, like one organization can't hold it all. So Keita, do you want to give examples or thoughts on that in terms of like the networks, the need, but also like, because I know in Massachusetts and here in San Diego, you've got funders backing these networks. Like, so you've got MCC really working with your CYD organizations to drive the work. In San Diego, we've got Claire Rose working with the San Diego Creative Youth Development Network. So any advice out there for CYD organizations that are in communities that don't have formalized networks? What some maybe first steps are, what makes them work? And
yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up such a good point, which is, it's too hard to do everything all on your own. And I think that's where some of the bigger networks, I mean, the Guild, for instance, has done such a great job with resources, but as people get to know each other better, I mean, it's been great to have, for instance, Rise has been on our call from they're from Richmond, and they're going to be joining us next week, you know, but they have such an expertise in youth voice and really being able to, you know, create programs where youth leadership is really at the center. So really hearing about how they catalyze is awesome. I think that the more that we can help, you know, because even on a statewide level, like we don't get to network as much as we want to, and we usually can't network outside the state too. So I think Zoom actually has been pretty amazing to kind of bring us together in ways that we haven't been brought together before. But I think, you know, I know that we on a grassroots level, when we had started with Yane and Edvestors, you know, it was just really pulling from all the organizations that were in Boston. What did they need? What did they want? And really starting to create agendas and trainings that were based upon needs and assets, and, you know, putting those together. So those that have excelled in it are going to present to those that are really needing it. And I think sometimes when you start on just that super easy, small level, it can build and build.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even the local San Diego network just really started with a number of peers getting together to support each other and see how, you know, we could do some peer learning, and then it's grown. And then when the Claire Rose Foundation stepped in to help support it, it kind of got more formalized. But you just start with that first step of bringing your colleagues together and building that trust amongst each other, because the network is built on trust. And we need trust now more than ever because we have to work together. So Bree Kessler brings up a question on, you brought up Zoom, Kate, and we're all on Zoom these days, right? We're all trying to do online programming. She asked, as programs may start offering more online virtual components rather than in person, which is what CYD is traditionally based on, is in person, right? That's been taken away. How might that change the funding landscape?
So I've thought about this. It should change your budget. You know, I have this mantra, show me your budget and I can show you your priorities. It should change your budget. It shouldn't necessarily reduce your budget. It should change it, right? In terms of how you're approaching the work, what kind of tools you now need to bring to bear, how you need to support your staff and your young people. All of those things need to be reimagined, and they should be reflected in your narrative and reflected in your budget, right? So I think that's how it changes. I think one of the unsung upsides is that when we talk to groups, their wait lists have gone down because now they're no longer encumbered by the limits of physical space. I can now reach tons of kids and they don't have to be here in real time. I can save those things. I can find ways to connect one-on-one. So as much as it can be uncomfortable to sort of think about this new kind of virtual engagement, it does present some opportunities. And obviously some of them are suboptimal when compared to the in-person, but it does present opportunities, and we should look at it that way, right? This is not, we're not encumbered, we're now offered with this new space. So I think it just changes the way you talk about engaging with young people, how you do it, your pedagogical approach. All those things should be adjusted to meet that context, but I don't think it fundamentally changes the landscape, as it were. I think it changes the stories, and I think it changes some of the calculus in terms of if you're talking to a funder that's really interested in scale, well, we got that now in spades because we can reach anybody, right? So now it's just a function of how you present that story.
And is that something you're looking at as a funder? Like, how are these organizations pivoting and really kind of accepting the new reality? And
yeah,
before, like, we can't go back. We don't want to go back. We've got an opportunity. So how are you rising to that occasion? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at all of that. I mean, I think, again, being people first, we're trying to make sure, is your staff okay, right? Are you going to be able to support that number, you know, your team with this new model? If not, what needs to change and how does it need to change? And how are you going to support your staff through that? And we're just looking at the pivots because, I mean, again, we've got CYD organizations that have turned themselves into food banks and into all sorts of things that, you know, that are needed more than anything else that they were doing before. So I think we've just been sensitive to, okay, well, what are the local conditions? How are you meeting the need of the young people? And then how can we help? So I think if that's the frame that funders can continue to take to the work, how the work gets done can change all kinds of ways, right, but that part of the equation doesn't.
Yeah. Anything from Keita or Meredith on that question, thoughts on how the funding landscape might change
I just
from a
have
government?
one mention, just one quick mention, which is, yes, all that's true. And it is such a loss for CYD organizations. I think so much of what we do is based on space too, and where we're at, and offering kids, you know, this whole other world with high quality supplies and the ability to be, you know, in this other environment. So just wanting to acknowledge, like, oh, that loss is there. And all the creative things that people are doing, I think, are fantastic. Some people actually have been doing Zoom calls from the space itself, you know, which has been really fun for some kids. Mailing of packages, kids have so appreciated that, you know. And so to your point, Tarek, you know, changing some of that funding. So, you know what, having a big bunch of money for mailing out so kids can get packages and art supplies, and that really is not a barrier to equity. And then as well as technology. I mean, I'm worried about that, and really being able to have access to even Zoom calls. I know a lot of cities have tried to deal with that, but we still have ways to go.
I guess I would just say that, you know, I don't know that it would alter the funding landscape for foundations necessarily, but I do see the opportunity around funding from individuals, and again, like broadening your message, using social media to, you know, bring in more visibility to your programs, and that sort of has a growth opportunity. I guess, if, you know, we want to be optimistic about where the growth opportunities are. I think that, you know, just that, you know, direct, albeit technologically direct, communication to a broader audience can bring a broader, you know, complex of stakeholders. So, you know, I think that's something back to that culture of philanthropy piece around engagement. So how, you know, what are the new ways that we can engage folks in what we do with youth? How can the youth engage with folks virtually now? So how can we be seen, and what are some platforms that will sort of raise that awareness and visibility? And in the end, you're sort of laying the groundwork for a broader cultivation, if we want to get into fundraising, of donors. So, you know, every touch point matters, and again, relationships matter. And so if you're, you know, if you're getting folks through social media networks and technology, and then you have the proper systems to be able to reconnect with them. So some of that is about data management and trying to, you know, archive all these contacts and then have other ways of reaching out. So, I mean, that is a significant amount of work. But if done right, in the end, you know, you will have some potential donors that you wouldn't have had.
So that's another great point in terms of during this in between time is maybe approaching foundations or funders for that infrastructure, operational support to build the system that you need.
Definitely.
That organizations should take, and not just always focus on the programming side, but it's time to build that infrastructure. That's
absolutely. Yeah.
It was brought up earlier too that maybe another opportunity to position organizations is around this the reopening, right? The cost of reopening. It's gonna be a real cost and do we feel? Have you guys heard? I'm always looking for trends in foundations or giving that. You know, foundations are looking at that, like they're kind of reserving some of their funding for the reopenings and the reemergence. How do organizations best kind of understand? Are there examples out there that you have all heard from, whether Massachusetts or Derek, your national, of organizations with reopening plans and budgets, what the impact has been and how they can position themselves?
The consensus that I've had is no, not yet, right? Because I think a lot of folks are still waiting for that first domino, which is typically the school district, to fall. And then that will send some sort of organizing ripples throughout a lot of the sort of next ring of the ecosystem. So I think there's a lot of folks in a holding pattern that are trying to figure out, okay, what exactly do I do next? How long do I plan to be sort of in this remote and virtual space? I think there are just a lot of unknowns so far. And I think that has been exacerbated by the fact that many municipalities have pulled back funding, right? I think about here in New York City, a lot of that after school funding, the summer funding, summer youth employment funding, gone, right? Just gone, right? So, and the relationships with school districts have been completely disrupted in a lot of cases. So I think unless and until we start to get some of those, some of that direction, it's hard to put together those kinds of budgets. I mean, so that's why, you know, when we talked about the administrative creativity, that was one of them. It's okay, well, that 3-year thing sounded really, really good before when 3 years was conceivable, but now when 3 months from now is an unknown, going a year out starts to feel really good now. So I think we're waiting on a lot of that. But then I also think that creative youth development orgs shouldn't be passive actors in that process, right? They should be active in talking with school districts and actually helping them figure out, hey, this is what we've been doing in the interim. Here's what's worked, here's what hasn't, here's how we can help, here's how we can fill some of the gaps that you can't, so that they can then sort of be an active participant in figuring out what their budgets and plans should look like.
I think especially as the summer is upon us too, that CYD programs can play a very particular role in sort of extending, in not school, but you know, programs to work with youth around you know, what their needs are, but sort of moving from the school experience to now perhaps we can enter into the next stage of learning with students during these months.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, that funders, ideally, of course, funders are taking a role in these conversations, knowing that resources are so limited, and they are beginning to think about, you know, how do we bring the education funders together with the arts and culture funders, with the youth development funders, you know, where are the ways that we can, you know, come together and think about how best to serve this group in sort of the cross-sector way we spoke about earlier. You know, how can we have these conversations to bring in these disparate groups to then sort of think together about how best to meet the needs of youth.
Yeah, and just on that note real quick, Claire Rose Foundation and the Heinz Endowment next week are holding a National Creative Youth Development Funder Forum on a Zoom call, just to start connecting the dots and just having more building of a community of regional funders and listen to each other, what each other are doing, but how can we all work together with our partners in our local communities to drive this forward. So that's happening as well. That's why people know that the CYD funder community is coming together to start having these conversations. Keita, did you mark that you were gonna answer Indy's question?
Yeah, I can't figure out how to work this, but what I was trying to say is that, yeah, I thought Indy's question was great. You know, I think so much of, you know, who holds the stories and the data is the ones with the power. And I would love to be able to have communities and young people really get to be invested in this system of really deciding, what data is collected, how is it collected, and what stories do we really want to tell. So I don't know if that went through or not, but that notion of data being like really around design, art, tech, and advocacy, that would be so exciting, where communities are really telling their own stories.
Yeah, and I think that just points to a theme throughout this conversation is true partnerships and collaboration, not just between CYD organizations, not just between funders, not between funders and CYD organizations, but communities and young people, holding the space to bring them all together to create the new possibilities, the new reality. And I think it's a shared responsibility for us to have this collective action and not leave voices out, right? And we can do that virtually. Now it's easier than ever to have these virtual spaces and funders play a role in that because they've got more capacity than these organizations. But if they can help drive that effort of bringing their partners together with their young people and their families to have these conversations. I think it's an important step. And I know that everybody on this call understands that, like the funders here, and we're always trying to influence and inspire our peer funders to do the same. But I just want to underscore that and underline that the future is going to be, we always talk about collaboration. It's going to rely on collaboration more than ever. So we're at 11 o'clock. That went really quick. I know there's lots more to talk about, but I appreciate everybody's time and all the panelists, everybody that called in. There was a question about contacting Kate directly for the CRM information. Are people allowed to contact you directly around?
Yeah, I put my email in there twice, but I don't see it.
Okay.
Yes.
I think all of us are always available to for questions,
Indeed.
right? Volunteer telling everybody.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Follow-up questions, email us directly. Our contact information is out there. We'd be more than happy to continue the conversation. So with that said, everybody stay safe, healthy, and have a great weekend. Take care.
Absolutely. Good to see everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.